Hey everybody, it's great to see you here. Welcome to our panel, which is called LGBTQ Film as an Agent of Social Change. Then and now. I knew there was more to that mouthful. We're going to be talking more about now than then, but we will be talking about our topic with a really extraordinary group of people that I'm excited for you to meet or re-meet, as the case may be. As you know, I'm Peter Stein. I'm senior programmer for the festival, and this panel grew out of an initiative that we were very excited to propose as part of our 40th anniversary at Frameline to the folks at the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, AMPAS, the people who bring you the Oscars, and we were very happy that this year the Academy reinstated a program that they had taken kind of a pause on for, I think, at least 1 year, which is their Film Festival Grants program. And Frameline over the years has been the happy recipient of a number of grants allowing us to show, sometimes it's retrospective film, sometimes it's educational programming, and in this case, for our 40th anniversary, we wanted a chance to take stock of the role that LGBTQ film has in telling a community's stories, so we called this program, or this initiative, In Whose Image, LGBTQ Storytelling, 1977 to the present, 77 being the year of the founding of the first gay film festival in San Francisco. This slice of it that we're going to be talking about today arises very specifically out of some of the extraordinary films that have played at Frameline in the past and most specifically are playing this year that address social justice issues. And it made me as a filmmaker think a lot about how is it that we know that our films even have impact? What is the role that film has to play in pushing social issues forward, either amongst a community or in building bridges beyond the community of interest? And so that's what we're here to talk about today. A little bit about the history of LGBTQ film as in terms of whom it represents and the social justice issues that it has brought to the fore, but more particularly about the role that documentary films today can play in that, and that's why we brought together the group that we have. Before we get to the specifics, I do want to thank first of all, the folks at Baycat who have provided equipment and some technical assistance, and they are assisting in our live stream today. So all of you, if you do get involved in the conversation as we go on, you will be beamed throughout the interwebs. And this panel will also, knock on wood and everything else, be available after the fact on Frameline's YouTube channel. And particular thanks to my colleague Alexis Whittam, who's probably doing tech support even as we speak, and to our programming intern, Sage Jackelson, for all of that help. And I also want to just tease some of this, the then part of this program is on display in full force this week at the Castro in our 1:30 matinee slots. We've got tomorrow the amazing film Living with Pride, Ruth C. Ellis at 100. On Thursday, the landmark, that is a film, if you haven't seen it, is about a 100-year-old African-American lesbian, really taking a look at how one person's history can tell the story of an entire movement and a community. We have Marlon Riggs's Tongues Untied showing at 1:30 on Thursday with a great group of participants of that film, as well as younger generation African-American thinkers and scholars talking about the image making in black gay life. And on Friday we're showing The Celluloid Closet, which is a great way to look at the history of Hollywood's representation of lesbian, gay, and transgender folks. So with that, I'm really pleased to have this extraordinary group of people with us here. Their bios are all in your kits, on the back of the sheet that you got as you walked in, so I'm not going to do all the honors, but I want to make sure to call out the great group of folks who are here. Starting over here on your left, Sarah Giordano, director of Kiki, our opening night film. Thank you for being here. Johnny Simons, director of Outrun, which had its hometown premiere screening on Sunday night at the Castro Theater. Deb Eskenazi, yes, applause. Deb Eskenazi, director of Southwest of Salem, the story of the San Antonio Four, which had a very moving screening with all four of your subjects last night at the Castro Theater. Congratulations. And Ellen Schneider, founder of Active Voice, whose particular mission is to help filmmakers, particularly documentary makers, think about and measure and enhance and further their the social impact of their documentaries. So, with all of that, bravo. With all that as introduction, I asked Emlyn if she could kind of help us set a framework for how it is that film, documentaries, have social impact, since that's really the work that you set out to do with your organization, Active Voice.
Thank you, Peter. And I'm so happy to be here and really pleased to be at Frameline. I am not a filmmaker. I could not possibly make a film. How many of you are filmmakers? In the room, raise your hand. Okay, so I have so much respect for you. I'm a strategist. So I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about strategy, and that's what Active Voice does. And I also want to warn you that I'm going to be looking from Phil to the screen. I'm not shaking my head no, it's just a little technical thing. So if you can go to the next slide. So, I can, yes, in fact I can. So you can click. We look at strategy, and we think that the stories that you tell are absolutely essential to social change. And the way that we look at it is through what we call an ecosystem of change. So we think that story is as important to social change as funding, as organizing, as policy development, as leadership. In fact, I can't think of a movement today that doesn't need story in order to build, right? So that's kind of our baseline. Let me tell you very quickly how this kind of evolved. A little over 20 years ago, probably a day a lot like today, I was just made executive producer of the PBS series POV. And I was sitting in my office because, you can go to the next slide, because I just put the first show for 1993 on the air. Has anybody seen Silver Lake Live, The View from Here? It's a stunning movie. It broke every rule in television. It's 99 minutes long. It was shot on high 8. It's a gay love story, which in 1993 was kind of unheard of on television. It doesn't have a happy ending. One of the characters virtually dies on camera, but it's absolutely a stunning, life-changing film, and it was for me. So I was sitting in my office feeling a little anxious because a couple years before, POV had put Tongues Untied on the air. And there was a huge backlash from the Christian right. Absolutely kind of a shaking experience for a lot of us involved, and set the tone, I think, for a lot of what Frameline and others have done since then. I was waiting for the backlash. And sure enough, my assistant came in. She said, there's someone on the phone that wants to talk to you. And she sounds kind of upset. Took a deep breath. I take the call. And this woman introduced herself as a homemaker from Utah. That's what I did, but silently. And she said, are you the person that put that on the air? I said, yes. And she said, we don't have many homosexuals in Utah. And she paused, and she said, I didn't know they loved each other. And it made me think, like, well, how could she, right? What would she have in terms of mainstream media to make that evident? That's what filmmakers do, right? So she took another deep breath, and she said, my husband just died of cancer. And that was my story, too. So for more than 20 years, I've been thinking about what is it about stories that actually help move the meter on social change? And how do we begin to articulate that in a way that those other sectors can really understand and, activate? And so I started thinking about Silver Lake Life as something that brought people together, right? The homemaker from Utah, and how many other people around the country, even the world, for whom that story, that love story, was their story, too. It didn't go deep under the surface. It kind of hovered there through values and characters. And in a way, it was kind of like a rake. I like metaphors. I don't know if you all do, but for me, they're very helpful. So some stories that you're telling are fantastic rakes. They don't demonize the opposition. They engage people around things that are meaningful to them. And that's hugely important around contentious issues. Sometimes you don't have time for that kind of process to happen. You need to go directly from here's the problem. In the case of Silver Lake Life, HIV, AIDS, and how we come to understand that and fight that through a community. But in the case of Deep South, they didn't have time to go through let's get to know the characters. They wanted to go straight from the problem that there are too many people in the South are dying of HIV and AIDS, and they wanted to give you the solution. And in that respect, we think of that as a trowel, right? Stories that tell you what the problem is, and they go directly to the solution. There's a call to action in a trowel. So some of you may be thinking about stories that do that. They're also called advocacy films. And they're particularly good in engaging the choir, mobilizing people who feel like you to get involved very particularly around an action that would make a difference. And keep going. Let's say you don't have that choir. Let's say you're trying to speak way beyond the choir. And these stories I consider like wheelbarrows, right? They don't hit you over the head with something sharp. They transport you. They carry you away. And these are fantastic to use particularly if you're trying to engage broader audiences. And many feature films actually have this role. They aren't necessarily calls to action, although you might be able to frame them that way, but they do have that longer-term cultural change potential. And without them, where would we be? And we're seeing more and more films and television series like Transparent and others that are beginning to take that wheelbarrow connection. Not all features are wheelbarrows. Some features actually tell the story of movements. They tell the story of heroes who will not rest until they have spoken out for justice. These are the stories that lift things up like a trellis, right? They lift up movements. They show that change is hard, that it takes time. These are very, very good for helping people understand how movements happen and how change happens. And they can be used for fundraisers. They can be used as coalition builders. And some of you may have that potential. Some of you here may have used films that have a historic perspective in the context of your work. Because unless you really know how change happens, we can't do better. We can't move forward. Are there any journalists in the room? Okay. So these are the hardest to find. These are stories that are investigative. These are filmmakers who will not rest until they have dug for the truth. They are looking for corruption. They're looking for injustice. And when they have it, and when they've identified root problems, their stories change headlines. They can change policy. They can get people out of prison. So shovels, again, are a particular kind of tool that are in the arsenal of those sectors that I talked about earlier. This is all available on this website that we've created called howdoweknow.net, and also some ideas for how you know if you're making a difference with these different metaphors. And I urge you to give us some feedback about what you think is missing. But I think it's also important to say that not every film is a particular tool. There are hybrids, and many of you are making and observing hybrids as you go. My interest is helping you articulate and helping those different advocates, policymakers, funders, really understand the strength of what it is and recognize that without you, we're not going anywhere. So I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to think about, in a strategic way, how the vast outpouring of stories that we have here and beyond can be the sparks and sometimes even the shovels and the rakes and the trowels and the trellises that help us make the change that we want to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Really so compelling. And we're going to keep circling back to these sets of horticultural metaphors and think about our own work in relationship to them. But it's a really powerful set of, you'll pardon the term, tools to think about our work as makers. And I want to ask directly of, for example, Sarah, with your film Kiki, first of all, whether any of these metaphors resonate with you in terms of what your goal was in making a film about a community that came to prominence 25 years ago with Paris is Burning, but here we have a totally different generation and a different filmmaking approach to telling the story of the ballroom scene in New York.
Right. Yeah, no, it was very interesting to think about these metaphors, and especially since I saw South of Salem last night, and I kept thinking it was so strong, but I can also really see the power of that film changing policy. And I kept thinking about Kiki, and we have that. We have that ambition as well, but. The film is made, we really wanted it to be a character-driven film. And so it's, I think, well, there's many aspects of the film, but that was particularly important because we wanted to humanize. And it's very funny because it goes against, making this film goes against all my training. Everything I was educated in, you can't get close to, there's no such thing as a closeness between, a person in front and behind the camera kind of thing. And I was educated as a visual artist and, those. But I really felt that became the goal, to find the intimacy, because the intimacy in the storytelling and this connection with the community is what made it, humanizing. And of course, what can have the impact is that we know that this community is constantly dehumanized in the representation of themselves. And and people are saying that in the film. They're like, the society just makes us be one person, like one thing, basically, not even something human. Because these are inner city youth, there's the intersection of, oppression around race and sexuality and class and all of these things. So that was really important in making the film. So I guess it's a wheelbarrow. Wheelbarrow, how you say it, wheelbarrow? Because actually, creating the narrative was very important. We also did not want it to be explaining. We didn't want the distance of explaining, like, look at this exotic world, let's, break it down for an outside audience. The film has many different audiences, and one of the audiences is an insider audience. It's the youth that, maybe are entering the Kiki scene, or, that are about to discover it, or, LGBTQ youth. That's one insider audience. So.
Well, why don't we have a chance to take a look at your trailer and have a sense of the images that you did capture. And I want to come back and ask you how it was that you actually forged those relationships as part of the whole process of making an authentic film with their authentic voices.
Swedish trailer.
It's the Swedish trailer, right. So I I would like to ask you, before we incorporate the rest of our panelists here, the particular effort to have this be, as the Kiki team would say, not about us, without us. The notion that your subjects are in fact your co-authors. That's, as you say, to some degree it might be breaking some rules, particularly when you develop personal relationships. But how important is that to what you felt was the authenticity of the film, the integrity of the film, and the way the message actually gets out?
Well, I think it's it's essential. And it was something that was not required. Like, I was invited to do the film, but there was no requirement, that it would be a collaboration. So it was something that when Twiggy and I started meeting, Twiggy is the co-writer of the film, and we just realized that it would be it was so needed to have a combination of an outsider and insider perspective. So, but we also, it wasn't forced. Like, we really collaborate really well together. We understand each other. We're both from very religious upbringings. We have other things where, we became very close friends and collaborators. So it was, but it is also, and was, very essential that Twiggy was the co-writer and that I wasn't, I mean, everything, happens, it became so much bigger and so much closer and so much better when we established that relationship. But the relationships were also established with the members of the Kiki scene. We were very visible during the production of the film, so we would update the community, go to the meetings. And this is a community that's very, very afraid of exploitation and that feel very strongly that they have been exploited. So this was part of our discussion from the beginning and throughout the production of the film.
That's fascinating, and maybe we can talk a little bit more as we move on about this notion of exploitation, because documentaries need subjects, and you need people to actually be vulnerable and reveal their stories for a larger purpose, and sometimes there's not always buy-in about what that purpose should be. Maybe that's a great transition to Johnny and your film Outrun, where you followed a group of folks in the Philippines who formed the first LGBT party, in the world, that is, Lab, as they made an effort to get themselves elected to the Philippine Congress or Parliament. Should we take a look at the trailer first and then talk? Maybe that would be great. This is from Outrun.
We want to unify all LGBT citizens, push for LGBT-friendly policies and laws. Transgender women, we always have to prove ourselves. I get those comments that I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough to be a representative of Congress.
The Black Party List is the only LGBT political party in the world.
I was in the chief exploitation, I was not happy. And I began to do something more meaningful in my life. We have to enter Congress and tackle our issues there.
It's all us going around the country campaigning.
This is exactly what we're fighting for, to be who you are.
A lot of what we're fighting for here has echoes in what's happening in other parts of the world.
If God will not me, I will not even have a face anymore to my community.
Let's do our part to make history.
So, John, you've actually been on the advisory board of Active Voice, so you've probably been thinking a bit about the way your work fits into or breaks away from the horticultural metaphor. So tell us how you thought about this story, which is a great story in and of itself, as in its obligation or its role in social change.
Yeah, well, I've always been my career really as a filmmaker has been around LGBT issues and creating social change. So I always, on some level, am thinking ahead of time about, okay, what's the core social issue that's behind the story? How do I find characters who are engaged in some sort of meaningful, or on a journey? And how can we pull the audience in and get them engaged in that quest that the characters are on, so that they want to kind of hang on and see what happens. And so in this particular case, we, my filmmaking partner, Leo Chang, and I discovered this only LGBT political party in the world in the Philippines, and we were really intrigued by it. We're really interested in this, all the amazing gains that have been made in the LGBTQ community here and in Europe and all the other parts of the world where there are really a lot of battles that still need to be fought, where their obstacles are that much harder towards our community achieving equal rights, human rights. And so when we found out about this party in the Philippines and these activists, one of whom is here, I just want to point him out. You just saw him in the trailer, Raymond. Go ahead, raise your hand.
Hey, Raymond.
Raymond just flew in from Laos for this screening, and it was really tremendous when we showed it at the Castro on Sunday, and he was there to see it. So he and the other characters were really involved in something important, and what we wanted to do was capture that journey and see, our approach was very observational as much as possible. You saw just even in that trailer, these moments, like they're out in the street, they're interacting with regular folks, people are kind of throwing their attitudes and opinions out, and they've got to kind of push through that and get to where they're going. So, and Ellen and I have worked together over the years, and I'm thrilled about the horticulture metaphor, and we've worked with my students, some of whom are here, and using that metaphor. I think this is probably, you can tell me what you think, Ellen, but I think it's probably a trellis. I guess I kind of make trellis films in general. Because it allows people to just engage and kind of get into the story and go with it and see where they end up.
And because you were actually following an election, was your thought all along, well, this is going to follow it to a conclusion, so there's no way that your film could somehow be a part of the communications process? Or I guess I mean that as a question. Did you ever think that in doing the film, you, whether consciously or by happenstance, could actually be affecting the outcome of the story that you were covering?
Well, we knew that the film wouldn't be done for quite some time after the election was over. It was very much driven by the election narrative. So, yeah, we didn't think that we could really influence it in any way, that particular election. But, of course, elections are in cycles. And so I'm hopeful that, now that the film's being released, that it can have influence on subsequent elections.
Right, which is my segue to Deb, because you've made a film where really, despite the fact that the women that you followed, whose the miscarriage of justice that put them in prison for all those years happened a long time ago, and they are on their path to full liberty, that path is not yet complete, and your film maybe even consciously could play a role in that. So I'm wondering if you could talk about whether that was a motivating factor in your making the film now, not necessarily letting every beat of their story come to a conclusion.
Yeah, I would say, it wasn't at the beginning. I was just investigating what I saw as a miscarriage of justice. And so I didn't know how far I could take it. And it wasn't until I was able to get a recantation on camera by one of who was alleged victims of the case that I felt like we had a major break. And it's the break that was like, oh my God, I think we could actually do something. Because before it was just going to be, help me with the horticulture, but it was just going to be just sort of an analysis of, but then it became the shovel. And yeah, it definitely, outreach and engagement is a massive thing now for us because, we do think and believe that we can exonerate the women in terms of getting justice for them, so, yeah.
Shall we have a look at the trailer? Great, thank you. This is southwest of Salem.
Satanic ritual abuse has become the fastest growing and most controversial psychological phenomenon in the country. It's a modern twist to an ancient story.
Investigated their world of covens and sacrifices.
This case is probably the last gasp of the satanic ritual abuse panic. Allegations were made that 4 young women had gang raped these 2 little girls.
My attorney said that I would lose. Nobody wants to go against a child.
The whole scenario sounds like a porn movie, a man's version of what women do in their spare time.
They got on the bed and they started touching me. What did they say? They were silent. It's too bizarre. It's almost dreamlike. The case, it went off track in about every way you could.
According to the people in court, this is what gay people do. No.
If this was an easy case, someone would have snapped it up a long time ago. These are people's lives.
How did this get past the media, the jury, the appeals process, their defense lawyers?
Until we get the exoneration, we won't actually be free of any of this.
The modern version of the witchcraft trials.
So this film actually can and maybe even is playing a really active role in a very specific social justice effort. I guess, that's a huge burden to have as a filmmaker, right?
Thanks, Peter.
No, I don't mean to lay it on. I mean, that's out of empathy, I guess I'm saying, is that you've actually chosen to wield a tool that can really affect the lives of the women who you've come to know over this time. So I think you could have made a very successful film without the kind of Errol Morris, we're actually going to use the film to get these women free. But I guess my question is, how important at this point is the outcome for you in terms of, are you now on this story and this project beyond having finished the film?
Yes, I'm on it. I mean, I'm committed to it. The film was part of a trajectory that helped release them from prison. I don't want to give anything away, because you guys should go see it on Thursday, Piedmont, 7.
Yes, second screening coming up.
I mean, my team is totally committed, because these 4 women, I mean, there is an intertwining that happens. I would go visit them in prison, and then suddenly there's a break in the case, and suddenly, all these other things kind of come flying out, and it's years and years of my life and years of my family's life. And it isn't like other films for me where, in terms of making other short films, for example, where it feels a little more removed. This is part of the sort of thing for me is exoneration. And to believe that someone like me, I mean, I live in Austin, I'm not particularly have any power, I don't, but the fact that a film can do that, the fact that a film can get these women out of prison, the fact that we leaked the footage before we even filmed, the recantation footage, before we even finished the film, just because we didn't know if we were going to be able to finish the film. We didn't know if we'd have the money. So we would do anything in order to propel the story and people's interest in it. And that was, that wasn't an easy decision. I toiled because it was like, do you do that as the filmmaker, or do you do that as a human? And, so, yeah. Can I just applaud another decision you made, which is some filmmakers might have waited until there was an ending. Yeah. And the fact that you said, no, this is exactly what we need now in order to shift this process, I think is phenomenal. Well, it really happened, it really happened also when I don't want to give too much away, but we finished with this series of hearings, and the hearings for us, we thought, oh, surely they'll be exonerated. I mean, these were bogus charges. It was incredibly homophobic. And then suddenly you can see the tenor within the hearings begin to shift, and in my team, we were devastated. And through the process of those hearings, we were like, oh my God, we really have to release this. It was like, this is such an outrage. This is astonishing to us.
What was interesting, even on the programming team, Des Buford, my colleague who was most in contact with you, would say, I think there's a new cut because there's been a break in the case. And we would generally fast forward to the end to see what slates were changing toward the end. But it's an ongoing and unfolding story. And a question that I guess I need help with in a way, Ellen, is we all as filmmakers take on these responsibilities in taking forward the stories and lives of the subjects that we have, and it is something of a burden. And how do you counsel filmmakers in how far they should stay involved personally with either their subjects or even the subject matter? Because is it now an obligation for documentary filmmakers to understand and exploit the most potent social impact of their films?
I think it's a great question. I think it's intensely personal. I think, the fact that everybody in here has a smartphone means that there are people all over the place who are making films. And so there's myriad reasons, rationales, motives, opportunities for engaging. But for serious, storytellers, I think the very question of what it is you're trying to do is first and foremost. For some, it really is capturing something in an artful way that has the participation of everyone available, that lives on indefinitely because it's timeless or because it brings to light a voice that hadn't been before. And some of the most effective films that I've seen actually encapsulate that. And then there are other stories that are so immediate that digital technology enables us to keep going, to follow along as we go. I think there's a tension there in that decision because there's so many options. But I do think that it really has to do with that fundamental question, what are you really trying to do? And how will that change and how will you support that over time? I don't have an answer for you, Peter. I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, I think of my friend and the filmmaker known to many of you here, Sandy Dubowski, who made Trembling Before God, which was really the first kind of exposure, very empathic exposure of homosexuality among Orthodox Jews. And for many years, it became a calling. That was his choice, but he also realized he'd made a film that in and of itself, as a document, could help change the conversation. And I don't know whether you're thinking about your own films is shifting as they move out into the world. Some of you have just had world premieres in the last few months, but whether you feel like you have a tool that can help shift a conversation, or whether after all the effort and all the money and all the time it takes to make it, you're ready to move on to another story. Johnny?
Well, I think for me, there's so much investment, time, effort, passion really that goes into these projects, and also commitment to the subjects and getting their stories out there, that I can't walk away from the finished films. I need to make sure that they reach the people who they're going to have the biggest impact on. I think with Outrun, we're at the beginning stages of that, but with some of my past films I can see it more. I made a film called Daddy and Papa, which is about gay men raising kids, and that was back in 2002, and we did not have Modern Family on TV then, and people had not seen what a two-dad family looked like. And so when that got out there, it had a huge impact on creating change in terms of people saying, wow, I could have a family too. I could adopt children or have children through a surrogate or however it might be. And I had people for years after that film came out, because I was a subject in it, my partner and I and our kids, would come up to me at Pride in San Francisco when we were marching with, the family contingent and say, oh, you're the guy who made that film. I want to introduce you to, this is my partner, these are our kids. We saw your film, and that was kind of what helped push us over the edge to actually go ahead and do this. And we adopted through the foster care system because we saw all those great foster kids in that film. And, so it was, for me, it was kind of like that one was super powerful, right? That the film could actually trigger the creation of families that wouldn't have otherwise existed. Obviously, there were other influences too, but that it was part of that conversation. So, and I think there's, all of our films do that in different ways, but we have to figure out, how do we can't walk away, getting back to your question. If we walk away and we just kind of sign on the dotted line and turn over to a distributor and hope that it reaches who we hope it's going to get out there, we're missing an opportunity.
Yeah, just a thought. I mean, when we were finalizing the film, or the last kind of intense 6 months of editing, then our producer, Laurie Schiedel, asked me. She was like, what is the goal of the film? I mean, she asked this several times during the process, but it was like towards the end, it was really, the film was really shaping up to be what it then become. And I said that I wanted it to change the conversation, and I still believe that, and I feel like...
What do you think it needed to change from to what?
I feel like it is on the level of representation. We have plans for outreach programs, and there's the Kiki scene needs a lot of support, but it was, we wanted to be a big film, a film that can, reach a lot of people. Like it was very important to us because we felt like, they deserve it. So, and I feel very strongly that the narrative is not fair around this group, and it's not correct. Many people are surprised when they see this film, and they will say to Gia or Twiggy, like, you're so articulate, like it's, you do so much in your community, you're amazing advocates. And it's like, why are you surprised? Why are you surprised? It just shows that the representation is there's a disconnect between who they are and the representation of inner city LGBTQ youth of color, but I feel very strongly that what you see here in these three films, and I'm very excited about both of your films, is this is storytelling. Like we do storytelling. They're very meticulously constructed, and it's just a matter of, and it's very impressive. So, but you can get the story to create social impact, and it's really in that. For me, it's in the craft, like their subject matter. But it wouldn't be understandable if it wasn't, crafted in a particular way that creates an impact. So for me, it's very much a level of storytelling.
I just want to jump in on that. Sorry.
No, and then Deb.
Because I think you make an excellent point, and I think that the people on this panel are particularly engaged long-term. They have a deep investment. This is what you're going to be doing and what you've been doing. But that's not true for all filmmakers. Some storytellers are storytellers, and I think sometimes we are too quick to assume that a creative person is going to also be an activist. That's appropriate for some, but it's not always the best thing. As I said, I couldn't tell a story, but I do strategy, and I think there's a tremendous amount of demand currently on filmmakers to do everything. Mm-hmm. And it's getting to be a problem. So they're becoming social scientists because they're going to do the evaluation, and they're also going to be the organizers, and they're also going to be the publicists. And this is not sustainable. So I just wanted to add like a moment of practicality that it can be what people wake up in the morning and think about and they do until they can't, stand anymore at night. But there also needs to be some more differentiation and recognition that skills are skills. And sometimes we just want storytellers to then hand it over because they're ready.
I had a question for you, Ellen, about you take, for something like Southwest of Salem, you take, it's a very clear goal. It's exoneration, right? And if that doesn't happen for us, right, then the question is, well, what's next? And so I wonder, though, is there a way to lay the groundwork out for something, and then you can tee it up so you can give it to people who are in a much more sort of powerful position so they can put it out in the world? I mean, so that we don't have to be doing this for the next 10 years, because that would also be impractical. We have to also work too and go back to other jobs. And
yeah, I think it's the same thing. It depends on what you want to do. When I work with filmmakers, I always say, what's your vision for the next couple of years? I think the handoff strategy is fantastic. I don't think you do it right away, because if you give your film to advocates at the beginning, you're going to lose your mainstream audiences. So you want to start off as mainstream as possible, as a story, as a cliffhanger, and then gradually work toward the advocacy route. We've seen films in the hands of advocates that have absolutely changed the way they do their work long term. And so that, to me, is part of that ecosystem, which is you're the storyteller. You may design that process by which it becomes their most vivid and successful tool that they could imagine. But that's part of the strategy, and I think it's a really good point.
I'm curious to talk a little bit about how we measure impact. Like Johnny mentioned, this kind of wonderful anecdotal experience of being approached at the Gay Pride Parade and saying, essentially, you changed my life and my partner's life, and there's now a child in the world who has a healthy family and so forth. And that is super, super powerful as a maker, to not even know that you have that impact. And yet we have, particularly when it comes to funders and how we actually finance our outreach campaigns and so forth, we have all of these metrics that we're often required to provide. So I'm wondering whether through past films or Ellen through your work, what are the different maybe even horticultural metaphors that we can use, or other metaphors, as to how a film actually, how its impact can be measured? Yeah, okay.
I'm talking too much, but let me just say that Johnny's part of How Do We Know Creative, and that there's a group here, and then a group in New York, and a group in LA that have been advising on this process. And I was in New York recently talking to How Do We Know Creative people there, talking about this very issue of expectations for how films contribute tangibly to change. And one of the senior people, the older veteran filmmakers, she's not that old, but she said, we're part of the problem, because as filmmakers, we went to foundations a couple decades ago, or a decade ago, and said, our film is going to change this issue. It's going to make the change, and here's how. And so the foundations believed it. Like, if you think so, we're all for it. So there's been kind of a growing inflation of expectations. I think we all know here that films by themselves don't do too much. You may be an exception, actually, seriously. But most of them don't. Most of them are part of something bigger. And so we would say, and you can see this on howdoweknow.net, that the way that you would measure the impact of a rake, bringing people together, might be through the coalition building, or people that weren't involved in that issue now get involved with that issue. But that would be a different set of indicators than the way that you would measure the value of a trellis, where you might see uptick in, membership or fundraising. So we actually believe that this is the time to begin to look very practically and realistically at what stories can contribute to, build a strategy around them, and then ask the right questions. The notion that big data is going to give us all the information we need, not accurate. So I think we're just at a point now, and I think all of you have stories to tell about this, when we're getting more insightful about what it is we want to see change and how we know if we're getting there.
Have you, in thinking about your films, actually had to imagine the kind of change you want to make? Sarah, you mentioned you wanted to change the conversation. Do you feel it's also your or part of your team's responsibility or desire to actually figure out, okay, is the conversation changing? What would that look like?
Yeah, I mean, if you're trying to also, if you're part of this financing, system, and you want the film to be bigger, which is what we wanted I mean, you have to persuade people that really don't care about you and really don't care about people in the Kiki scene. You know, how do you persuade them to care about them? Like, I mean, I had financiers saying, like, you know, I was very, you know, passionately kind of, you know, presenting the project and, you know, the great needs and how people are dying and, you know, homelessness and, you know, HIV infection rates and all this. And then the person showed no, you know, there's no empathy there. You know, and he would say, like, you know, he would say, what does this have to do with me? You know? And, you know, in a way, I was, like, triggered by that. But then, and the producers were, like, trying to, you know, because they saw I got really pissed, you know? So they're like, let's talk about something else. But in a way, you know, afterwards, because I just said, like, you know, that people are dying, and they said, you know, why should I care? But then it was a challenge. I'm like, so how can you make this person understand how important that is and how important they are? And how important it is to go to the politics of the margins. They're in the margins, but we can learn from them, and they should get more visibility and, you know, a platform to speak. And, you know, so I was kind of like, I saw it as a challenge to do that, but it's extremely exhausting to make someone care that doesn't really do it. So the way that Twiggy and I very consciously did it was that, you know, we have, people were like, oh, it's voguing, it's entertainment, you know? So you can kind of hook people in with that. So they're like, oh, great, I'm gonna see all these amazing dancers. And there is, of course, representation of that in the film, but the film is not about that. The film is about these 7 people and their advocacy and, you know, their life stories. So, you know, we kind of feel like we hooked people there. But I don't know if I answered the question.
No, you did very much, and that's essentially a storytelling strategy in a way. You are opening with, or you open a doorway that is very, very accessible, which is voguing. I mean, listen, as an opening night film of a film festival, we also looked at how we were maybe going to present Kiki just in the general talking points as, remember Paris is Burning, that incredible film about this world. Well, guess what? This is the contemporary update of it. And of course, we all knew it's not really about voguing at all. That happens to be the entertaining doorway into a social justice film. And I don't know if either of you have had those kind of challenges of how do we present a film that actually is about something quite serious, but maybe that's not your opening move.
I think in our case, you know, we knew we wanted to make a true crime film, and this is prior to some of the big waves, and so we spent 18 months editing, and we took what we saw as a genre and as a model, and we're like, how can we keep queering that? How can we make it more queer? Like, so there were lots of those conversations, and I think because true crime is, and now we see that we were right, was just such a compelling, also problematic form, we were like, well, how then can we use that problematic form to our advantage? And we had a hunch that if we could just take away a lot of stuff and use that music and keep talking about the issues, you know, like the things that I do in some of my shorter films, which are like stylistic and a little bit like artsy, and this is so not what I'm used to doing. This is very like plot point, very fast, very sort of, yeah, plot driven. But I think it was in the genre that we were able to say, okay, this is how we're going to hopefully grab them, is through the genre. And, you know, and I hope I think we've done that.
Yeah, well, because you're basically able to quote a genre that is both very compelling and accessible, and also you turn it on its head, you queer it. And Johnny, I mean, you've taken, it's a classic form. It's the election. It's the story of the race. It's like sports documentaries. It's like you've got competition, you've got challenges, and you have a result that you're dying to know what happens at the end. And I'm not going to ask you to disclose here because many people haven't yet seen it. But I'm wondering whether you felt you had to kind of sort of dance around some of the larger or more serious or complicated issues beyond the horse race of the election itself.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the election, of course, you know, creates this great framework, and, you know, we knew there would be an outcome and there was going to be suspense regardless. But, you know, what the other things that Outrun has engaged in it are, one thing is that there's a lot of pageantry, because in the LGBT community in the Philippines, one of the cultural spaces that is allocated for folks is these Miss Gay pageants, which take place in every little neighborhood or village throughout the islands, and where gay and transgender people stand up and essentially perform this act out, this pageant. And it's very, on one hand, it's sort of, there's a lot of idolatry, and in another sense, it's very patronizing. And but it's to kind of look at the the irony and the mixed messages that's going on within these these pageants, but it's also super colorful, and there's music, and it's a little bit like the voguing thing where part of you just wants to watch because it's exciting. So so that's an element that's there, but the other elements that the film is really about is grassroots organizing, because the campaign goes into these Miss Gay pageants, and they go into beauty parlors. Beauty parlors are the other place where the queer community hangs out and is essentially relegated to in the Philippines. And they use those cultural spaces as their grassroots organizing spaces. And it's an opportunity for people to say, outside of the Philippines, oh, well, let's say we're trying to mount a campaign for LGBT rights in some other part of the world. How could we do that? How could we use grassroots organizing in our own space to achieve a desired result? And that's, I think, where I hope, getting back to impact, we can say, okay, let's take this film, which is really about one country and one culture, but bring it all these other places and have people then engage in that conversation and hopefully, create change that way.
Yeah, that's a special challenge, I think, because in a way, sort of like the cruel response, or maybe it was ultimately a helpful response that you got, Sarah, from that. I don't know, it was a funder or potential investor who's saying, like, what do these people mean to me? In a way, in a maybe gentler way, you have to ask yourself that question, John. Is like, how do we make the Philippine party mean something to an American broadcast audience?
I had a lot of trouble, this is maybe a non sequitur, but I had a lot of trouble pitching my film to gay people. That was, like, in a way, the most resistance, because of the issue of, like, child sex abuse surrounding, this notion that gay people are more predisposed to sexually harming children, which we totally know is ridiculous. But the fear of that, was so like, well, we don't know. And I mean, I had a lot of trouble, like you with your financier. It would be like, come on, this is family, like, I was in the process of coming out. I mean, it's kind of like, I've told this story before, but I came out to the women before I came out to my own family. And, it was really stunning, and it was heart-wrenching. But it was like, how can I get people to listen? And, so those were early conversations, too.
I think you're raising an important part about the formation of partnerships, and I don't know, we don't have time to get into all of this in its, precision, but most of the work that we're talking about requires and is dependent on organizations that do this work every day, as you were suggesting, to become, the hosts, the purveyors, the strategists, and the people who leverage the stories. And what's happening that's changed a bit since I think you and I first got into this field, when there was very little film and video available to advocates and grassroots organizations. Now there's a ton. And so at the same time, a lot of these organizations become very brand conscious. So they want the stories that they're going to use to really align with the branding and the promise that they're bringing to support their own work. So it's a really shifting landscape.
Yes, very much so. In fact, I mean, I recently was involved in a documentary series where the outreach and education funding was more available than the production funding, because they could already see how they could use the message that they presumed we were going to produce. And yet there would be no film, there would be no story if we couldn't actually get the production funding. It was quite frustrating. It's like, well, we can write a curriculum guide, but nobody's going to care if you can't get the stories that actually
What would it be about?
What would it be about? Exactly. And I'm curious now, as we can turn the conversation to more interactive than just among the five of us, whether you are audience members, filmmakers, activists, the kinds of films that you have responded to, were you brought into any kind of action, whether personal or political, by a film that you made or a film that you watched? And what is it that you look for in a documentary, or just whatever it is that's on your mind that's prompted by the conversation here? We'd love to get the conversation started. But I forgot to ask Hal and Phil as to, you going to take my mic?
There it is. We're going to share.
Well, since you asked,
good.
I think, I'm so glad you're doing this topic, because I think that this is really at the heart of why many of us have been such strong supporters of Frameline for the 2.5 decades that I've been a supporter of Frameline. But I also, I want to probe a little more about another aspect that you you sort of skated around a little bit in the panel today, and that is filmmaking that isn't professional filmmaking. I mean, you guys spent years going to the Philippines. How many times you went to the Philippines? You told us the other day, right? 5 times, right? And you stayed 6 weeks each time. A lot of filmmaking that is having social justice impact these days is actually not that kind of filmmaking. I mean, as important as that is, as supportive as I am of your films and of all the films that have come for decades, a lot of it is from here. So my question for you is, what can we do to train, support, put out, promote the kind of social justice media that is actually being produced today by the vast majority of filmmakers who don't necessarily have an arts degree behind their name, who don't necessarily ever get a credit, but who are actually making change. And I'll just give you an example. Last summer, we were engaged here in San Francisco in activism against a religious leader who threatened to fire all the LGBT people in his schools. And a summer worth of activism, we weren't sure where we were going to go with it. So we strategically made sure that we got still images and video images of the passion of those students in front of him so that he would see what he was doing. And you know what? This year, a trans teacher came out, and he was asked what he would do about it, and he said, I won't do anything about it, because we value all of our teachers. So, go for it.
Who wants to take on this question of maybe different media, different formats, different platforms that can be activist platforms beyond long-form, multi-year filmmaking?
Yeah, I think that I have so much respect for those projects, and also smaller format projects, and also very amazing films that people can make on with no budget, basically. We were very we wanted a certain production value, because it was also a matter of representation, that usually the way this demographic is represented is in a much more lower production value. So we wanted the images to speak in a certain way, not a superficial way. I hope you understand that. But what I feel though, Gia inspires me a lot. Gia is in the film, and she's a debate champion. And she speaks so well, and I feel like there's a relationship between debate or rhetorics and storytelling. So I feel like even if it's a film with a cell phone camera, or an iPhone or whatever people have, it's making the argument through the filmmaking, and making people also have it impact, making people feel something. So I feel like that is part of my teaching. I'm a teacher also. Like, it's a matter of how you treat that material that you collect, and storytelling is a powerful thing. So I feel like that is something that can help those smaller projects have more impact. Not that beyond what they already have, which is of course important. You shouldn't always measure it with what shows at an important film festival or theaters, and projects have different types of impact that is equally important. But I do think that there's an extreme power in storytelling.
And just to chime in that, you know, like, for example, in Southwest of Salem, some of the most, I think, intimate and beautiful scenes were shot on a cell phone. I mean, and we use those knowing that in some ways, because we're sort of seeing that the intimacy of a phone, you know, that we knew it would play as intimacy as opposed to the contrast of a different, I mean, I think there's permission to, you know, I don't have a background in film. My background is reporting. And, you know, I sort of taught myself. And, you know, and I think it just was a matter of me wanting to do that. And I knew that the beauty of something like a cell phone could capture something that, you know, and somebody else filming that I could never have gotten myself. So.
Yeah, I would say, just jumping off that, you know, it sounds like what you're talking about is people who are, you know, right there in kind of the heat of the moment, capturing something super authentic. And that kind of footage has incredible resonance. And I absolutely encourage, you know, people to go out and get that kind of, whether it's street activism or just, you know, being in the right place at the right time and capturing something that otherwise wouldn't be on film. And I also think it's really useful if you get that footage to partner with someone who does have a kind of broader filmmaking background, because I think it can help shape the larger story, and also because no matter how good your footage is or how amazing this event is that you captured, it's really competitive right now to try and get your message out to a wider audience. In one hand, okay, we have the internet, you can throw it up on YouTube, lots of people might see it, it might go viral. But on the other hand, if you want it to screen in a festival, or you wanted to reach people and really engage in the kind of a more traditional way of reaching a broad audience and sparking dialogue and that kind of thing, you may need to be in partnership with folks who know how to operate in that world.
I want to I want to make a quick note of this thought, and we'll come to the next question. It occurs to me that the kind of documentation and evidence and sort of this needs to be shown that we now take for granted as being in our pockets with cell phones and so forth, was back in the day, and I think about what we just showed here 3 nights ago, Gay USA, which was Artie Bresson's. He basically had a whole team of film crews fan out across the country in 1977 to record simply the fact that gay pride parades and marches were happening. And it's kind of like the documentary version of what we now say, please go to this Occupy event or go to this protest. And similarly, although it wasn't nearly scattershot, and these things were edited, in a way, word is out. The first true kind of oral history testimonies, beautifully crafted and cast and edited for story. But it was such a basic level of, we just need to hear who these voices are. Those are both films from 1977. And here we are, 40 years later, where the emphasis on crafted storytelling is far, far more competitive, and the platforms are different. We have many, many other ways of presenting these stories. And I think that's more challenging, frankly, because you have to decide the format of what stories, how you're going to document your stories. So thank you for allowing me to make that point.
Hi, I had 2 points I wanted to ask the filmmakers and the whole panel. If we are to find our community, could you tell us what sort of social media you used to bring the message out? And then the second is, since there's so much video in short form on YouTube and Hulu and all of the other places that you can watch it, have you considered that the venue of a film festival is only one of the many you should adjust your media or your message to?
Great question. Are there short form or snippet versions of any of your films or interviews or pieces?
Well, it's very strange, but there's all kinds of rules, like, the our producers are like watching all the footage like a hawk, you know, like you can't, what is it, you can't release more than so many minutes, so you will not be eligible for any kind of, you know, award, and, you know, so there is still like a lot of rules. You know, and that is, it's tricky, because I just want to put it out on Vimeo, you know, so everyone can see it. But you also want to cultivate and make sure that it lasts, I think. If you feel like the film is important and you want it to continue to speak, then you have to be very careful where you put it out. But social media, though, and I want to say this, this is probably one of the main differences from, you know, if you look at historically when people been working with this community, like Marlon Riggs and Johnny Livingston, that was in the 80s, and now social media has been had a huge importance in the transparency, you know, with the community. So I interacted a lot with the community through social media, and I did release clips, and you know, my producer, don't tell my producer, but I released clips and photos and things like this, like stills, throughout, you know, the past 4.5 years to the community, and that has also really, you know, helped create, you know, this kind of relationship that I have with the community. But yeah, I don't know if that.
I'm wondering, Ellen, do you want to address the different modes of storytelling and impact that a feature-length documentary that might play a film festival would have versus this more targeted, we need a 3-minute clip that's going to be sent out with an e-news blast to actually get people to vote on something or contribute to a cause?
I would just say quickly that part of the thing to think about is language. So we call everything a film now. Well, we don't. Not everybody does. But it's just much more nuanced and much more targeted than that. And so there's a problem right now. It's just time in history when we're making a huge conflation. And I would even wonder if someday it might be the Frameline Content Festival, or if there's something specific about the word film that denotes craft and storytelling. Because for many people, what you do on your phone, that urgent action, that interview, that, you know, come down here and let's, you know, take this building over, may or may not be crafted, but it could be incredibly influential. And yes, it does use a camera, and it is distributed digitally. So I think we're just at a time in history where we're kind of sorting this stuff out.
I'll just jump in on the question about shorts. I was just at a film festival, actually, where all 3 of our films were playing last week in the UK at the Sheffield Doc Fest. And I went to a panel about shorts, and there are, you know, it is really blowing up as I think in the minds of folks as a length. All these different platforms, OpDocs, Channel 4, The Guardian, a whole number of European ones that I had never even heard of before that are, you know, on the forefront now. So I think that we're going to be seeing a lot more of you know, highly crafted short form documentaries that are reaching out in very different ways to different audiences to try and create impact. And I just want to also give a shout out to a program that I highly recommend you all come to, which is this Saturday at 11:30 right here on the Roxy, is a program of queer student shorts. It's the first time that Frameline has ever done this in the past. We have a lot of younger student voices who are creating shorts, not just docs, but all different narrative, fiction, experimental, that have been curated by this, a group called the Queer Cinema Institute, which I'm helping to run at San Francisco State. So it's a great program, and I think it would be a good way to kind of look at different forms of queer storytelling and how they're being told by the younger generation.
Thanks for the plug, too.
Yes, and in fact, Natalie is here. She's right here. She has a really, really interesting film in that showcase, and she's passing out some postcards to you all right now. So, activism is at work, right?
I start to see it. Deb, did you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, we, just to go back to the original question, you know, at the time that we were, after the recantation, we started really getting a bunch of footage from the prisons because we wanted to give the women agency, you know, to be able to tell their own story, and they were limited by, of course, the prison walls. We actually would do community engagement screenings of just raw footage. And people, and I know that that was one of the reasons why, you know, we went from nobody knowing their story to the New York Times and Forbes magazine and CNN coming, because, you know, queer activists would just sit around in basically like a room, and we would just watch the footage of the women talking about their stories from prison. And those were about 45 minutes of just raw footage. And, you know, what we did do is we specifically did not edit anything, so that, you know, I felt like this was the most potent thing I can do right now from where I'm sitting, is gather, you know, my community in Texas. And so we did a lot of those.
That's really powerful, really extraordinary. Next question.
Hello. To be a slight devil's advocate,
good.
These days, with things getting increasingly siloed with people's political affiliations and their belief systems, you know, it's one thing to find our audience, but in terms of changing hearts and minds, reaching across to actually creating change and not preaching to the converted, how do you make that leap? And as a side to that, I've been saddened sometimes that, you know, you think about the impact that Bowling for Columbine seemed to have in the moment, but, you know, measuring that degree of change, you know, it felt like it changed something, but I don't know.
Well, I would just add that, you know, this notion of different kinds of stories help support different kind of change I think is relevant there. There's a lot of interest beginning to show, at least within philanthropy, about harnessing popular culture and entertainment. And I don't know if that's kind of on your mind, but there's an organization that you might want to keep an eye on, which is called And Action. And they're going to be looking ahead at what's coming out of Hollywood and stream series that might be relevant to certain movements. So if there's an episode of Fresh Off the Boat that deals with an LGBT character, or if there's, you know, a new series that's the successor to Transparent, they're going to let advocates know in advance how to take advantage of that. So that's an effort to use already existing content and that people already are watching, or maybe not everyone, but at least targeted audiences, and get those into the hands of advocates. So I think that the strategies are really starting to migrate in some pretty creative ways. And I think the question of broadening that, you know, is super important, but the algorithms that the internet companies now have in terms of what you're watching and what you're watching and what you're watching are going to be streamlining this whether we like it or not.
And, you know, we can't change the world. I mean, you know, because I totally understand what you're saying, and I'm so frustrated by that, because of course we want to reach the entire world, but, you know, we can't. And, you know, all I can say from where I'm sitting is, what can I do now for me with the skills I have?
And I want to just harken back to Ellen's opening story about the house homemaker in Utah. You know, who I think we can get cynical and think, oh, we're not reaching people, but. You know, I had a similar experience when I showed Daddy and Papa on national television, and I was terrified, and I got people, you know, I'm a Christian from Alabama, and I want to tell you I've never seen anything so beautiful as those gay men and how much they love their kids, and, you know, stuff that you just would not expect, but you know what? People have the capacity, they recognize humanity, you know, and that crosses political boundaries. So I think ultimately these stories can have bigger impact than we realize.
Right. Has anybody seen Murder on Sunday Morning? Anybody? Well, I saw that when it came out 10 years ago. It was an Oscar-nominated film, incredible film, a true crime film as well. And, you know, 10 years later, I was trying to make the same film. Do you know? So it's like, you never know. Like, you never know who it's touching.
Question there, and then we'll come to you.
Yeah, I'm back here. I wanted to go back to Peter's question of how do you know what effect something has, and a lot of it has to do with what you're aiming at. So I was working on a film, we started in 2012, and we finished it in 2012. It's called Transgender Tuesdays, and it was about healthcare. And we finished it in a year because we felt that there was a need for it to be part of a national dialogue. That was both good and bad. The film was very hard-hitting, so that the chance of getting it on PBS was sort of, no, it was a little too heavy. On the other hand, we were able to make choices. We did recut it into a version half the size, aimed at professionals and advocates, and got it out free to about 400 doctors, nurses, social workers, trans activists, for them to use. And we focused on getting the film into libraries. So we managed to get it into about 150 libraries, partly thanks to a platform called Canopy, which does streaming. So the fact that we can't look at it as something that reached millions of people. But if the goal was, and it was, to reach the people who were making social change and give them a tool that they could use, to me, that was a successful film. We can still put it on Vimeo, but platforms like that to me are a mile or a million miles wide and an inch deep. People see it, and then they move on to the next 5 minutes.
Right, and maybe that's a very interesting sort of correlating comment to Loretta's about Bowling for Columbine, which, of course, the goal would have been that, things like Sandy Hook and Orlando would never have happened after that film, but it may be that it's going to take a deeper and a clearly longer effort to make change in that case than just as one successful broadly released film. Another question down here.
Thank you. We are coming at this from a different perspective. We're the subjects of a documentary in process right now, and my wife and I, we are we're learning every minute of every day. Part of the reason we're here is to learn more. Our filmmaker is in Atlanta. She did one award-winning film called Breaking Through, and our film is the backstory to the Greta Kammermeyer case, Serving in Silence. Ours is Surviving the Silence. And we're frustrated because we started 2.5 years ago and wondered that how long would it take? We had no idea how fundraising went. We pushed family and friends to donate, and we did get funds, and I think the filmmakers were able to start sooner than they would have. But now we don't know, and we also have that intersection of a personal contact, a personal relationship with the filmmakers that can border on being pushy, being impatient, all of that. So it has a whole life of its own that's separate from the film itself. Our goal when we first started was not a film. That was never in our mind. We spoke at our community college about our story, and she happened to be in the audience and said, I want to do your story next, my next full-length feature documentary. So it's been a roller coaster of excitement, learning, frustration, all of the above. Do you have any guidance for us as subjects of a documentary?
Takes such a long time to make a documentary and to finance it and everything. It's a very complicated, it kind of it's endless basically, we're still in debt for this film, pretty heavily actually. So it's that I just thank you for working with the filmmaker and the generosity and that you were so engaged and that you're willing to share your stories, because this is what I feel very strongly about. Like I feel like they're gonna hear our stories. You know what I mean? I'm just like, I'm not giving up until they have to hear our stories, and I mean the outside world, why are certain stories considered big stories? How many stories have we seen of a, coming of age, white cis male, straight guy, right, cis guy? How many of those stories have we seen? How many are they going to be put out there? Like, I just feel like, damn it, like that's part of the struggle to just get these very, important stories like yours out there and wide. Like I feel like there is a shift, there is a discussion, even on, like I'm not so interested in becoming famous, like that's not why, but I feel like I'm gonna work until I fall down, you know, to just get it right out there, because that, you know, that means something. That can have an impact that people see it, you know. You want to be part of, I want to be part of the mainstream for the first time in my life. But that is because I feel like there is a power in that, you know. So I hope it goes well. You know, I want to thank you for the work that you've done and that you share your story.
Yes, thank you for that. And also, I was going to say, I think you may have given me and all of us a thought about a whole different panel at a different time, which is navigating the prickly and indispensable and really complicated and sometimes dysfunctional, but usually really, really fruitful relationships between the people who have to put their lives on camera and the people behind the camera helping to tell the stories. It's very, very complicated, and I join Sarah in thanking you for being willing to be out there, and I hope that your film gets made. I heard about, we met each other last year at a radio interview, and I really hope that maybe next year or maybe in 2018 your film will be ready for all of you to view. We could go on for a long time, but I think we've given lots of food for thought here. I know all of you would love to check in with folks outside in the lobby, and I want to thank all of the panelists, Sarah, Johnny, Deb, and Ellen, and all of you for your wonderful thoughts. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.